In 2003, Akira Toriyama and Katsuyoshi Nakatsuru, the veteran animator of the anime, partook in an interview for the TV anime guide Dragon Ball Z Son Goku Densetsu. They were asked tons of questions, but one of the more interesting ones is the topic for our discussion today, and it all concerns the origin of the series itself. With regards to how you got started on Dragon Ball, the motif was kung fu movies, wasn't it? Yes, to begin with, I saw Enter the Dragon starring Bruce Lee back when I was a student. I remember I got so hopped up on it that I went to the movie theater for about 10 days straight. You went every day? I did. I saw it about 3 times a day, and even now I watch it on video. As a film I first saw during the emotional turmoil of adolescence, it influenced me greatly. After Enter the Dragon, the flow of the action movies really changed, didn't it? There was a boom in kung fu movies, and everything had dragon tacked onto it. But I thought, something's different. It has the feel of a cheap knockoff. And around that time, I saw Jackie Chan in Drunken Master and got hooked. Altogether, I must have watched that over 200 times as well. So did Dragon Ball's dragon come from Enter the Dragon? Of course. Anyway, something kung fu has to have dragon in it, because I thought if it doesn't, then it's not kung fu. I'm just like all those cheap knockoff movies. So anyway, when my editor found out that I liked kung fu movies, he said to me, in that case, why don't you draw a kung fu comic? I told him, the things I like and the things that I can draw in comics are different, so I don't want to. But then he went ahead and set up a schedule for me, saying, finish it up by such and such a date. And it was this sort of, what feeling, you know? From the very beginning, I was drawing Dragon Ball going, I don't wanna. So I spent my time building plastic models and such, until almost right up to the deadline during the serialization. By the time I got down to work on the storyboards, it was already 2 days before the deadline or thereabouts. So other than Journey to the West, early Dragon Ball was heavily affected by the kung fu movies of the 70s and 80s. Something that we kind of instinctively knew, but really rarely recognized due to so many of the tropes from said movies being already heavily melted into the anime aesthetic. We kind of just saw them blended together and it's just like, oh, that's just anime. Still, the journey of Goku as a character, especially at the beginning, greatly resembles the path of a kung fu movie protagonist, in spite of how much Toriyama would try to subvert this. We won't be talking about the movies themselves per se. This could be a topic for a separate video, but instead, we would like to focus on the underlying layer of Goku as a martial artist and how his outlook on the matter changed. We did a video on Goku's mentors back in 2018? What? Was that almost 5 years ago? Time, what are you doing? Stop! Sorry people, old people problems. As a note here, we'll mostly focus on the Dragon Ball era because this is the period when our protagonist had learned most of the basic stuff that he would then go on to actually exhibit. Z does have some notable moments, and Super is, well, kind of obvious. Anyway, we met Goku when he was 12, living alone after the unfortunate demise of Grandpa Gohan. The only martial arts training that he had at that point was from Gohan himself, who was a really talented pupil of Roshi in his own right. But in this case, I feel that the whole martial arts upbringing was mostly used to teach the boy some discipline, rather than actual fighting techniques. Give him a way to deal and vent his aggression, his innate Saiyan aggression without him even knowing it, which Gohan might be afraid of resurfacing. And last but certainly not least, teach him to fend for himself, which he did quite masterfully. It was something the two of them shared. The first proper fight we see Goku have, the most raw one, was against Yamcha, and honestly, he kinda lost that one. While he is pretty agile, he was rather confused and allowed the bandit to go pretty heavy on him with his wolf fang fists. If you don't remember it very well, I would recommend you actually go watch that fight. Yamcha was really cool in it. It's kind of crazy that something that is his defining trait had to develop and he initially didn't really have it. But it was clear from the very beginning that Goku was very talented at the art of imitation and mimicry, adaptation even. Something that will become his staple much later. After seeing Roshi put down the flames and accidentally destroy the Flame Mountain, Goku is able to flawlessly mimic the technique. A trait that shocks Roshi, as it was a technique that he had developed over decades. It's kind of funny to see that the old master influenced our hero before he formally started to train him. One could argue that the influence was already there through his pupil Gohan, but it's a nice little way to show how important Roshi is for Goku's core as a character. Still, the next big thing is the training, as well as meeting Krillin. We won't be talking too much about their relationship, as we've already alluded to it many times over the course of many videos. And while the video regarding Goku's mentors is kind of old, it does still stand. You should really go and give it a look. But what's important is that our protagonist becomes more defined and less chaotic or unaware. He learns the proper rules of a martial arts duel, something that is immediately apparent in his fights against Kiran and Nam in the 21st World Martial Arts Tournament. And while the Beast is still able to use his naivete, and the fight is more gag-filled than the later ones, it is worth noting that it does enforce the use of Goku's tail, something that we see frequently in that era of the series, and the character. Also, something that we did not discuss with Yamcha, but we probably should have whilst on the topic of early Goku, is that he uses his small frame and agility to his advantage. It's kind of obvious that as a kid, our protagonist will fight differently than when he's a full-sized adult, but it's still worth remembering. The 21st Budokai is also a place where we see Goku's ability to improve shine, as he tries to adapt and adjust his skills to various situations and opponents. It is worth noting though, that his loss against Jackie Chun is pretty vital to his development. It's also worth noting that Roshi convinced Goku to do the final charge and used his being taller than the boy to his advantage too. You see, things are starting to actually overlap. Listening to his opponents becomes a bit of a flaw, something that is present even in Super, but it really started here with Giran and Roshi. Now with the Red Ribbon Army, Goku's on his first large mission to fight a large group of evildoers, where most of the scuffles are for his own life or the safety of his friends rather than just a cheeky sparring session. While his style doesn't really evolve in that period as he takes on their commanders, machines and monsters, it is worth remembering that this might be one of Goku's most deadly times to be alive. If you think about it, he causes the deaths of a lot of the army members, but the series doesn't really dwell on this that much because, yeah, Red Ribbon Army, they're baddies, and yeah, it's Dragon Ball, so yuck, yuck, yuck. But we do see glimpses of Goku's more vengeful side when we see Eta stopping him at Muscle Tower. But before that, we do see the second great loss that he has at the hands of Mercenary Tao, and it's quite vicious. And this might be cited as Goku's first real fight for his life where he could actually die. Tao toys with the boy and defeats him without that much effort. I don't think Goku has ever had that significant of a defeat before. Then he climbs Korin's tower in order to become stronger. This is when he learns that training and earning the strength itself are more important than some magical trinkets, and that power has to be gained. Something that also echoes much later in his development in the series. You know, the whole thing with Super Saiyan God and how he didn't like it at first? And this marks his first divine training to boot. He's able to cause Tao to hurt himself with his own grenade. Again, a feat that becomes part of his repertoire, being able to turn the enemy's power against themselves. Still, the Red Ribbon Army is a little bit of a transitional phase between the more kung fu, comedy-esque fights of early Dragon Ball and something that is a little bit more recognizable to Z fans, some of the more serious scuffles of later on. Also, the shorter fortune teller barber segments do show that even after all these years, Grandpa Gohan still knows how to push his buttons. And the fact that he reenacted the whole duel all those years later in Super does show that this encounter was very important to him on a personal level. He's never forgotten it. The 22nd Budokai is notably less gag-filled than the 21st, and Goku becomes more confident in his abilities. His talent for inventing unorthodox fighting techniques becomes even more apparent, as does his conversational nature during fights, when he comments on his opponent's moves. He also defeats Pampa with one punch, which starts to set our hero apart as being stronger than the average human, or what many other humans can actually possibly achieve. His fight with Krillin on the other side is like facing a mirror. The two are so close in their skill level at one point that watching them go toe-to-toe was a truly rewarding experience. He's also able to overcome his tail weakness, tricking Krillin into believing that he had the upper hand over his friend. At the end of the day, Goku's just a little faster and manages to win, still greatly respecting his rival. His fight with Ten Shinhan on the other hand is balancing on the line of a tournament fight and fighting a villain, being the crowning achievement and their third great loss. Although you could argue that the victory here was taking out the good in him during the scuffle. It's worth noting that during the fight he does once again show his mimicry ability, as he is able to copy King Chopper's 8-arm fist, now into both Piccolo sagas. While the older of the two is the first proper big bad that Goku faces, the fight against him is not as interesting, and doesn't push Goku forward as much as training with Kami, for example, and fighting with Junior. Both his encounters with the Demon King are relatively short, but once he is done with the second divine training, things start to look pretty spicy, especially since it's the first saga where we can witness a taller Goku. Some people even call this the best fight in the entire franchise, and it's not hard to see why. This is the fight that debuted such staples as Goku's own improved Super Kamehameha, or Piccolo's giant form, as well as some amazing choreography, which is pretty much historic to this day. Also, thanks to Junior supersizing himself, our protag can once again rely on his smaller size, like in the old days, which is a nice nod to the series overall, where it came from when it was a staple. It's also worth noting that you can truly see how even this fight was. Maybe the most even in the entire series, seeing how damaged both of them were at the end of it. And that caps off the original Dragon Ball. We won't be dissecting Z all that much since, at the time of the series beginning, Goku was already a martial arts veteran in his own right, but we would like to pinpoint a few interesting moments for your benefit. Raditz is the first Saiyan character that Goku is facing, and it's very hard for him and Piccolo to even lay a finger on him, which has to end in a sacrifice and a bit of a ruse. And he is the weakest of all three. Something has to be done. Goku's training with King Kai gives him two major staples, the Kaioken and the Spirit Bomb, both pretty important to this day. Also, his loss against Vegeta, yes, loss, while they ultimately defeated the Prince, it was more of a group effort, seemed to push him even further in his journey towards fighting strong guys. Even though it kind of started with Roshi's training, I would argue that this battle with Vegeta influenced him even more. Secondly, all the way until his fight with Frieza, Goku was rather fond of spamming the Kaioken button countless times with all of the risks involved. Again, his victory against the Space Emperor was greatly caused by his own hand, but we had that Goku overpowering opponent feeling that we saw during both King Chopper fights. But nevertheless, it's important to acknowledge that his fights during the Namek and Saiyan sagas are still a little bit chaotic, but they went much cleaner after his return from Yardrat. I would argue that we call modern Goku style was born around the Android saga, and although his improvising and mimicry hadn't faded into obscurity, he had fully matured as a martial artist after he returned from space. True, he gained an additional layer of calm after his time in the other world, and during the Buu saga he was basically a master, but it did not change his outlook on fighting one bit. The last phase, if you will, is going beyond the mortal level and Ultra Instinct, polishing of a diamond in a way impossible for mortal arms. In fact, it's so impossible that it requires an angelic teacher to even be able to unlock this power on a whim. He also realized that his body was stronger than he thought it was, but for a moment he was unable to reach it, and as Whis once said, becoming too relaxed and losing his focus, which was proven many times to be his fatal flaw, can actually get you in trouble. By getting through this journey, we can see that Goku has reached the peak of his physical prowess about halfway through Z. But everything that has happened after that has been more spiritual. He had to be dead for quite a while to get to like Super Saiyan 3, and then he needed an angel to go further beyond that. A lot of the staples from the early days are still there. He takes techniques from his opponents, his natural improvisation abilities are second to none, and yes, even his flaws are still here. Goku the Warrior wasn't created in a day, and we think that in the long run, you can still see the progress, even though the series likes to show him making the same mistakes time and time out. But I do find small enjoyment in watching that little kid, confused by Yamcha's attacks, not knowing what he will become in the future. If you haven't watched this little fight in years or at all, do yourself a favor and watch it. You will have fun, I guarantee.